We'll let him say hi at that point. But in the meantime, and I think really out of consideration for the fact that it's midnight where you are, we're not going to let this drag on too long before we get rolling. But regardless, I hope everyone's got their whiskeys. While we're waiting for the stragglers, I'll maybe give you guys the lineup. I'll type it out again in a little bit too. We're going to start with the Artist Blend KWM Cask number 2. The Glasgow Blend KWM Cask number 2 will be number 2. Then the Experimental Grain, Compass Box Vellichor. Then the Compass Box KWM 30th Anniversary Blend. Number 6 will be the 25th Anniversary Blend. And then we are going to wrap things up with Flaming Heart 15th Anniversary. So hope you guys got that. As I said, I will plug that into the chat again momentarily. But the show must go on. And the fact that James Bjorn has not joined us yet, I think we'll just get rolling. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight on, at least where I am, is a rather hot, sunny Friday of a long weekend. Obviously, the impetus for this tasting is this bottle, our 30th Anniversary Blend. But we also wanted to harken back to 5 years ago when we launched this bottle, the 25th Anniversary Blend. And all of you actually have a slight advantage over James tonight because James was not able to find a sample of this at the shop before tonight's tasting. And anyway, I'm going to remedy that in the fall when I make my way out there. But regardless, I'm really excited to try these things and to try them side by side. And I'm kind of grateful that I set aside a case of these so that we could do a tasting like this down the road. And I've still got 2, maybe 3 tucked away for future potentialities, we could say. But James, quick introduction, James Saxon is one of the whiskey makers at Compass Box. More importantly, he's the man who created this blend and then also had to rescue it just before bottling. But we'll get to that in a little bit. James, thanks for staying up late with us to talk whiskey tonight.
It's a pleasure, Andrew. Thanks for having me. It's a delight to talk to you, as always, and everybody out there in Canada with, yeah, as you say, some air conditioning will not go amiss.
Yeah, no, air conditioning is definitely going to come in handy tonight. So we have 7 whiskeys tonight, kind of running the gamut of what Compass Box does. We've got some blends, we've got a blended grain, bunch of blended malts. You know, before we get rolling, I guess one thing that I'd like to say, which I've said several times before, but it's very sincere and I mean it. Compass Box has been a company that I've really enjoyed working with for, I want to say, close to 16 years now. Goes back to the very early days of my career in whiskey. And I was always kind of enamored with sort of the fact that they were willing to put their necks out and do something different that no one else was really paying attention to at the time. And I've said it several times before, and I'll probably say it many times again. I think what I really loved was that Compass Box was trying to take blends back to what they originally were, was creating something greater than any of the individual parts. It wasn't about making, I don't even know what the right word I'm looking for is. They weren't making a commodity. They were trying to make something that was of quality and noteworthy at the same time. And, you know, for a while, I think they were the ones trying to make blended whiskey sexy again. And I think has also forced some of the industry to change and do a better job of what it was doing for a long time and what it took for granted for a long time, which was the blended whiskey consumer. So I love the whiskeys. I love what you guys do. I love the fact that you frequently poke the industry and larger players with a sharp, pointy stick. I try to do the same in my own little way from time to time. Yeah, it's a brand that I've loved working with, and I'm extremely grateful that we've had opportunities to do exclusive whiskeys with you guys over the years.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to work with you guys as well. You know, as you said, holding on to that case of the 25th, a shrewd man, as well as great foresight and a great palate. So always a pleasure to make some whiskeys with you. And yeah, to your exploits, as you say, we do have the sharp stick. We don't have the, I think it was the heavy roller that you used. But yeah, we're looking into that. Plant
Yeah.
hire is getting easier.
It was shockingly easy to convince someone to let me make use of a steamroller, and inexpensive, I might add too. I think it cost me a single bottle of whiskey, but no regrets, as it were. Well, let's not keep people waiting too long here. Why don't we segue into the artist blend? Obviously, this is not the pure artist blend. This is a marrying cask of it, but maybe tell us a little bit about the line and kind of where it fits within the Compass Box range.
Sure, yeah. For those who are new to Compass Box, it's a really fantastic tasting that Andrew has lined up, and all of these are limited editions or one-offs or exclusives, as he talked about with this one behind me. This is a twist on one of our core whiskies. So we make 7 whiskies year round, and that runs the gamut, as Andrew was saying, in style, starting with blended grain with hedonism, which I'm sure many of you will have had. Really delicious on a warm day with an ice cube, right through to our blended Scotch whiskies, of which this is one example. And then obviously our malts, which I think most people will know us for, the likes of Peat Monster, Spice Tree. We now have the Story of the Spaniard added to that roster, so to Orchard House as of last year. But the single marrying cask program is a really popular one. I think store picks have really accelerated in recent years, certainly the last 5 to 10. And that's very easy to do if you're a distillery. You just send some samples of your individual casks. As a blender, it's a little bit harder because obviously everything we have is already blended. But it's a great way to tell the story of what we do that's a little bit different. So one of the key things that sets us apart, certainly from other major players, is this idea of marrying. It's a very old term, has a long history in Scotland. And you basically take all of the individual components for your blend. You will put those into a vat, anywhere between 50,000 and 100,000 liters, big volumes. And then you basically take that blended liquid and you return it to its original casks. And that period of marrying, we add a bit of water as well. So there's a tiny bit of slow reduction going on too. The marrying process just allows all those flavors to integrate. And those of you who've had artist blend before will know it's always going to be sweet, soft, lots of vanilla going on, great quality American oak that we're using there, lots of fruity notes too. Our single marrying cask program, though, allows us to cherry pick some of those casks, some of those original component casks, and make them available to retailers, bars, all sorts of different people. And so this one that Andrew selected, the whiskey has spent a significant period of time, more than a year, in our, I'm going to say signature, but it's something that a few people are starting to do now too. But there are custom French oak casks. It's basically a used American oak barrel. We take the circular ends off. We insert virgin toasted French oak to the insides. We then reattach the heads to the barrel. So there's about 8% of the whiskey in this blend has been aging for an extra period of time in those casks. But now, after the whole blend was dumped, a small portion of it was returned to those casks. So you've got a refill virgin French oak influence. And this does have an extra spicy note. Lots and lots of, for me, it's quite medicinal. There's like a eucalyptus kind of thing going on. There's a bit of clove, really, really nice, and a very, very different take on artist blend. So really worth checking out. Single marrying casks, bottled at slightly higher ABV, 49% versus 43. But yeah, a really delicious way to start the tasting. So cheers, everybody. Were there a couple of options that you had, Andrew, or was this the one that you're like, gonna select this one?
Sorry, James, I had myself muted for a second there, and I was trying to figure out why this was not showing on my site, which
All right.
which I think I might have temporarily resolved, but it all spins back to this new point of sale we have. Anyway, I've set the link out there for people. You might not be able to search it, but at least you can see it. And I'm going to share my screen as well too. So yeah, we were lucky. We, as always, we often have a few choices. I think we were presented with 2 different artist blends this time and 2 different Glasgow blends. And there was one of each that we absolutely loved. And of the 4 different marrying casks we've done, this is hands down my favorite. It is lush, fruity, incredibly elegant, and spicy. There's like a really nice spice kick coming through it because of that finishing in the French oak custom barrel. So yeah, this is one that I think we're nearly out of. There's not a lot of this left, but it's just incredible value. And it's the sort of whiskey I love pouring for people that are single malt snobs that will not touch blends. And I can pour them this blind. If they come in and tell me they want something, fresh, fruity, maybe a bit spicy, I can pour them this and blow their mind when I tell them that it's not a single malt, it's a blend, that, 35 to 40% of the liquid is actually grain. And that when that's well made, you can have something that's rich and full of character. I think when you know that it's blended whiskey, there's some signs in there that you can pick up. Like there's hints of grain whiskey in there that are obvious if you know it's a blend. But for the average consumer, this is the sort of whiskey they could try and not have any idea that it's a blend, that it has actual grain whiskey in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our 2 blended products, and we'll talk about Glasgow blend after this, immediately after, but yeah, we are majority malt for our blended scotches. So 55% for artist blend, 65% for Glasgow blend. And the grain is there really just to give it a little bit of extra mouthfeel, a bit of extra succulence. And yeah, like the malts, aging in first fill bourbon barrels mostly. Yeah, good pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I'm gonna have to put myself on mute and talk to the store, because I think I know why they're not showing on the site, and I'd like to remedy that because there's not very many left, and I think they're going to sell. But yeah, it's a lovely whiskey, and no exaggeration, I think this is one of the ones that I've been most excited about the last year. We knew it was good when we picked the marrying cask, but when the bottled whiskey came in, it was even better than we'd remembered, and it definitely didn't disappoint.
Yeah, absolutely. A little bit of time marrying in bottle is never a bad thing, and it does take a little bit of time to get to you over there in Alberta, but worth the wait.
So sometimes during the COVID era, it's taken up to a year, but thankfully the Compass Box stuff has been coming through a little bit more rapidly, which is great. I see our friend James Bourne has just signed in there. We'll give him a minute to get settled. Yeah, the artist blend, even the non-marrying cask versions, if you haven't tried them, I think they're incredibly good value. Same with the standard Glasgow blend, very good value, excellent quality. And those 2 especially, I think, are also priced at a point for people that like experimenting with whiskey cocktails where they make a lot of sense. I'm a bit biased. I think higher proof makes better cocktails, but that's just me. That said, I think this is just such a lovely whiskey. I don't know that I would have the heart to put it into a cocktail.
Yeah, that would be a very special single marrying cask cocktail right there. That's a highball I can get behind.
Yeah. Well, since he's there and I can see his video feeds up, I've made James a co-host so that he can say hi and join us. Hey, James.
Thank you very much. I was supposed to be joining with Adam Bradshaw at the Strath. Unfortunately, his back is thrown out, so he won't be joining us. But yeah, very gracious of you, James, to join us, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So one other thing I would mention as we go through this tonight, if anyone's got any questions that they want to ask, well, I suppose it could be either James, but primarily James Saxon in London, fire that into the chat. If you have comments you'd like to make or want to share tasting notes of any of the whiskeys we're trying, again, please put those into the chat. We'll bring them up as we go. James, should we move on to Glasgow?
Let's do it. Yeah. So, yeah, the process for the single marrying cask, it's the very same when it comes to Glasgow blend. I mentioned that there's a higher malt content that goes in at first, dominated by Speyside, robust, meaty Speyside malt. And then there's some Lefroy as well, a bit of Clynelish, and a little bit of our Highland malt blend. And then that's all supported on some delicious Cameron Bridge, around about 11 years old. So one thing I should say, and you know, if it's on this chat or subsequently, if you want to know anything that's in our bottles, you know, we really pride ourselves on transparency. It's going to be a theme for tonight. But yeah, just let us know, and we can let you know. It's our pleasure to provide a little bit of extra information, because it's all useful. It's all fascinating. Every year I'm working on new batches of these products and I'm seeing them evolve, and I'm seeing our stocks come in and go out, and it's a fascinating thing. And if you really love your whiskey, and you love drinking it and thinking about it, Compass Box is one of those ones that keeps rewarding you. But yeah, the Glasgow blend, this one, the marrying cask, for all it's much more of a sherried, peaty style of whiskey, this marrying cask is kind of unusual. It's from an American oak barrel. So I don't know for certain, but I would imagine this is either the Cameron Bridge or the Clynelish, potentially. But it's really given it
sorry, James, I can confirm that it is Clynelish.
It's the Clynelish one. Fantastic. So it's giving you, yeah, you're tempering the sherry a little bit. It's making it a little bit more, and this is one of my favorite words in whiskey, austere. There's that sweet fatness on the palate, but all of these aromas start to rearrange themselves. So standard Glasgow blend at 43%, lots of sort of boozy cherry and that campfire smoke. This is, yeah, it just feels a little bit more, strange to say, but grown up. I think I saw a comment just come through, GKS. So yeah, all of these whiskies used to be under the Great King Street moniker. So Artist Blend was the very first one with sort of the cream label, and the biggest words on the label were Great King Street. And we've now changed it to a bit of a mouthful, to be honest. We've changed it to Artist Blend. So for anyone who's not seen the latest version of the packaging, I'll just go and grab it from my cupboard.
Oh, James, I can pop it up on the screen here. Sorry, I was just trying to tweak some things in the website so that these things go up, but I believe this is what we're looking for. Give me a split second here.
People who come into my house would have no idea that I'm massively into whiskey. It's all hidden away. But yeah, this is, and I think Andrew's bringing it up as well, but yeah, formerly didn't have the figure on the front of the label, and this would have said Great King Street. It was the name given to the range, Artist Blend and Glasgow Blend, and we've just decided that Great King Street has served its time, and we're just going with Glasgow Blend and Artist Blend. So I hope that answers the very brief question.
Yeah. Man, that's easy drinking. Yeah, and I think you know, the GKS, just to go back to that, retail systems have a limited number of characters in them. I know Kelly from the Scotch Malt Whisky Society Canada is on this chat and will appreciate this too. If we wanted to include the full name of society whiskeys, which sometimes might not even be possible, we would have to abbreviate Scotch Malt Whisky Society down to SMWS, which is something that might happen at some point. You never know. But that's one of the challenges. It's like Gordon MacPhail, to do Gordon MacPhail Connoisseur's Choice, Mortlach, 1999. Like, most systems don't let you do more than 2/3 of that, or half if you're lucky. So that's my abbreviation for it. And it made sense to me. And yeah, that's where that came from.
Yeah, it's the version of that classic quote, if I had more time, I would have written less, with whiskey.
I think whiskey makes me write more, but that's a whole different story. I love that. It's quite different. So I know this question often comes up. How does this compare with our last Glasgow marrying cask? This is actually a little softer, not quite as intense. The last one was very sherried, and I found more peaty. This one, and I think it's because of the Lefroy, I find it a bit more medicinal. It's not quite as bold and strong, but it's a bit more medicinal and it's a little bit softer and a little bit creamier as well too. To me, this is great summer peat. Like this is peat you can drink in the summer, whereas our prior Glasgow blend might have been a little bit big for that. Anyway,
yeah, it's a fantastic autumn sipper. I definitely turn to Glasgow blend a little bit more come the colder months.
Yeah,
but yeah, the ex-sherry Glasgow blend marrying casks are weighty things. But yeah, very delicious.
okay. And I think the other point to these two is they're, like I mentioned with the artist blend, the Glasgow, just even the standard Glasgow blend, very good value for money. And this is another type of whiskey where I would pour this for people, and most people blind would be stunned to know that this is a blend as opposed to a single malt. And that's, I think, testament to how well made these are and to how good a job that you guys do, James. Shall we segue onto the experimental blend, or the experimental grain? Sorry.
Experimental grain whiskey, yes, let's do it. And this is one of the minority of whiskies that are not exclusive to Andrew tonight.
There has to be a couple of them. So
exactly. So when it comes to our range, I talked about Artist Blend Glasgow blend. There are blended scotches within the 7 that we make year round. But my job, in addition to sort of blending these up every year, is to source some unusual parcels of whiskey, or at least see what we have available to us and make something tasty around those. So experimental grain whiskey is one of our limited editions. This was launched in the spring. And thank you, Andrew, for bringing up a wonderful fact sheet for this. I can stop talking now. All the information you need is here. But for us, I've got a friend who works for Loch Lomond, and Loch Lomond is a dream blenders distillery, really. They can do everything there. And I knew that they were making basically malt whiskey in one of their column stills. And then about maybe 18 months ago, I saw that they'd made available in a black bottle the same whiskey, but peated. So you see a lot these days of grain whiskies which have been finished in, ex Lafroig, ex whatever it might be. But we wanted to get hold of actual peated grain whiskey. So experimental grain whiskey, the name really does give you all the information you need, because we didn't really know how this was going to go. We started off with this idea of expanding what people thought of when they thought of grain whiskey. And obviously we started the blended grain category back in 2000, and it's something that we continue to dabble in. So having access to this spirit, this thing, which was legally grain whiskey, although technically you could also argue it's potentially closer to a malt, it just gave us this nice kind of foot in both camps parcel. So trying to balance that was a bit of a challenge. The Loch Lomond parcel is about 11, 12 years old, and finding the way to bring in some of those gently phenolic flavors with more traditional grain whiskey did take a few weeks and months, but we're really pleased with the result. And yeah, experimental is just keep that in mind when you're nosing this. Like when we got samples of these Loch Lomonds in, it's a peated profile I've not experienced before ever. I think with the column distillation, and I think it's 86% ABV is the spirit plate for this particular spirit style that they make, and it really softens that smoke. So if you're expecting sort of big medicinal, heavy iodine kind of stuff, it's not here. It's very light. They Ashley and the team at Loch Lomond, Michael Henry, they describe it as clove-like. So it's like a eugenol quality going on. For me, it's like walking through deciduous or even coniferous woodland in the fall or in the winter. There's a real kind of mossy, lichen-y kind of quality to it. But combine it with Cameron Bridge and North British from the 90s, and you've got something really, really oily, really fat with this, really curious smoke quality. Like, as I say, we're really, really pleased about it. We're pleased with the presence. We're pleased with the range of flavors you have, but we know it's not going to be for everybody's tastes. So that's kind of why we've got this very unusual label, not the standard sort of artistic, beautiful stuff. We only really want the whiskey nerds picking this up because yeah, it's something a bit different.
Well, and going back, I'll pull the label up again just so people can see what you're talking about. Which, by the way, I love the fact that you've got something very descriptive, and then layered over top of that, you have a diagram of effectively like column distillation. The point I wanted to bring up about this that I love is that in some ways this is more reminiscent to me of mezcal than it is of whiskey. There's this, I don't know how to even describe it, like this plasticky medicinal kind of character coming through that's just very unique, but it's not as rough or raw as mezcal. It's just there's something different. It's sort of somewhere in between a peated whiskey and a mezcal to me in terms of profile, but I think it's fun. I love it. This would also be a good example of like peat for beginners, people who are not used to drinking peated whiskey, or for whom peated whiskey is very intimidating because it comes across incredibly soft and incredibly delicate on both the nose and palate.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of John and my great loves in terms of spirits is mezcal, and we have tried over the years to find a bridge blending Scotch whiskey and mezcal, and maybe this is the missing link. Maybe this is going to get us back on the trail.
Yeah, for sure. So I understand this was something they did, but they're not doing regularly. Is that true, or is it something that they might do again given the response to this whiskey?
It's a very good question. I'm with you. I don't believe it's an every year thing, or at least it hasn't been. There was a bit of a gap in the age profiles that we were offered, but I do think potentially now every year they may well be doing it. It just helps with their palette of flavors that they can work with on a lot of their own blends.
Well, Loch Lomond's such a fascinating distillery. I know that James asked the question if have they given a name to this style or this spirit?
I don't think this has I don't think this is named after any of the islands in the Loch, but I could be wrong. But certainly when they sell it.
I was going to say, Jeff helped us out. I knew that it had a name. I believe it's called Raw Stew, isn't it?
What? I don't think, I know Raw Stew is a name they give to one of their, but I didn't think it was the peated grain. Is that?
I think it's for the peated and the unpeated grain.
So they've definitely used it for the unpeated, and they've done that for years, like 30, 40 plus years they've been making Raw Stew for. But yeah, maybe they use it for the peated too.
I think it needs a different name than Raw Stew. There should be something else. Maybe name it after like some potentially dangerous microbe found in the lock somewhere would be somehow appropriate. Peated Raw Stew, it's just not enough. Anyway, we'll work on that. But I guess what I wanted to say about Loch Lomond that's so fascinating is a company that for the longest time was really flying under the radars because most people just assumed everything that they produced was garbage and low-end spirit, but consequently, a lot of this was going into, bourbon casks, refill casks, and some of it being left for a long time. There's some really interesting things that they've been distilling that might not have been classically interesting to the industry. But when you look at some, long fermentations, different cut points at distillation, and then, the purposes behind that were initially to have components for blending, but some of those components in and of their own right are quite interesting. It's a distillery that had a lot of a hidden potential that people just didn't really think about for the longest time because, going back to when I started, like Loch Lomond was a non-entity. It was at the bottom list of malt producers that you would think of.
Yeah, but I think in some respects they were ahead of the curve, and they've been doing their thing for a long, long time. And now finally the tastes of, we're all curious people when it comes to whiskey, and this setup is so fascinating, and they've got however many styles of malts just from their Loman stills, pot stills, different fermentation times, different peating levels. It's all there waiting to be discovered. And now obviously they've got a bit more of an emphasis on showing their own stuff. And they're getting the rewards for it, which is great. So yeah, thank you, Loch Lomond. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, just another component for you guys to play with effectively. And
exactly.
Yeah. Well, I hope they do continue to produce it, because I think it's another interesting addition to the styles out there. All right, let's move on to the oldest whiskey we have for tonight's range, but also I think in a lot of ways one of the most delicate, and that's why we decided to put it in the middle of the range, so that your palates wouldn't be blown up by the last couple. James, tell us about Vellichor.
Yeah, well, I just have to reach to my bookshelf. Just take this off. Pour myself a dram. Yeah, Vellichor is it's a really special project for me. A very special project for me. I don't have a sort of chemical engineering background. I came into whiskey through passion, through a lot of luck as well. And I was a literature student at university. And so I spent a lot of time in old parts of the library, studying, hasten to add. And yeah, that smell of old books is something that's incredibly special to me. And John has a literature background too. And I came across this word. So this is one of those whiskies that didn't necessarily start with a parcel of whiskey. It started with an idea. And that's how a lot of our limited editions do come into being. So I heard this word Vellichor, and a lot of you, I'm sure, will be very familiar with the word petrichor, that essence of the smell you get of land after rain. But Vellichor was a neologism, a new coining, and it's to be found in John Koenig's Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. And it describes the smell of a secondhand bookshop, but crucially, it also describes that feeling that a secondhand bookshop gives you. For anyone who's a book lover walking into, and I remember some classic examples in Edinburgh, and there's loads in London now too. So many books, and only one set of eyes and one lifetime. So it's something that we wanted to build a whiskey around, given that the components of the books and whiskey are actually a lot closer together than maybe is talked about. But the degradation of paper, of lignin itself, it's exactly the same thing that's happening in a cask to whiskey. So we turned to, as you say, Andrew, we turned to some old parcels. Most of this is 25-year-old Highland Park. And we've got some old Macallan in there as well, and then some slightly older Kalila. And then really special for us, though, what we would call our first editions, is we came upon some samples of pre-blended whiskey. So whiskey that a company had blended themselves, put back into cask, and then basically didn't have any further use for. So they offered them to us. And these are whiskies that had spent maybe 10 plus years in cask, refill sherry casks as well. So they had this lovely antique quality, and they just fitted with this idea and this concept that we wanted to bring to people. So yeah, Vellichor, new word, relatively new whiskey. This experimental grain comes from the spring. Very, very special whiskey to me.
This is, I think, probably my third time having the privilege to try this. James and I poured it, the other James who's in on this tasting, poured it at a tasting in, I want to say May. Does that sound right, James? Yeah, it was in May. Then we had Scott in the shop earlier in the month to do an in-store tasting. We poured it then. This is the first time sitting down and nosing it tonight that I can actually get that aroma of old books, where I'm actually pulling it off that. And it's reminding me when my grandfather passed away and my grandmother was moving into a condo, my parents sent me out, and she said, I've always been into history. My grandfather was a professor of classics. And she said, basically take a look and let me know what books you want. And it just reminds me of opening some of these 80-year-old books that they had in their home And there was like a different type of paper. And I mean, I can even remember the feel of it and opening them. And I'm grateful that I still have some of these books, but the first two times I had this, I think maybe the other things I had around it were so much more intense and dominant that it overshadowed it. But this is the first time tonight where I'm actually kind of picking up that character on the nose. Like I can actually really sense that.
That's great. And whiskey tasting is all down to conditions. So maybe 27 degrees in your brother-in-law's house is actually the right combination.
So, yeah.
But yeah, you're so right. Those older books, I've got a very old. This is from the 1890s collection of Burns poetry, or the Gilded Edge, and this is the kind of vibe that I wanted to convey with the packaging as well. So there's a lot going on here, and yeah, I think for anybody who enjoys that sort of atmosphere. And that sense of discovery, when it's like, oh, what am I going to pick off the shelf? What's going to be my next adventure? It's all coming from that.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think the other element here, and this is something that I probably for the last 5 years have been really searching out are, this is what I would consider to be a very spirit-driven whiskey. Like, yes, there's oak character there, but these are older whiskeys that have been allowed to sort of evolve in the cask. The cask has not run roughshod over the spirit. And I think some of those elements that you were looking to create in this whiskey, the reason they're there is because of time in less than first fill casks for the most part.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is something very special that happens to whiskey as it ages, and it requires this fragility, but also this, I think, this quiet power as well. And especially those Highland Parks, they had this wonderful tropical quality together with that, violin workshop, dusty leather kind of quality that tiny hint of Orkney peat is giving you. So that was the parcel we needed to build this around. But layer in some of those sort of buttery dried fruit flavors from the sherry aged blends, and yeah, age is kind of it's tied up in it all, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a cool whiskey, and yeah, a nice addition to tonight's range. Incidentally, and since he's here, this is probably a good point to mention a bit of thanks to James and Authentic Wine and Spirits for helping out with the range for tonight's tasting, which kept the cost down, but also meant that we were able to share these with a bigger group of people. So as always, to James Bourne and Authentic, thank you for your support. He's incidentally joining us from a hotel room in Victoria, which explains the glassware. Unfortunately, you don't have the best glasses for tasting use.
No, strangely too, I was at the Strap about a half an hour ago, and I should have borrowed something from Adam, but we were planning to taste together in his boardroom, and I think his boss was less than enthused. Plus, he could barely walk. He had a cane in both hands when I last left him. So,
oh dear.
Yeah, he almost hit a pedestrian in his bike, and I think it threw his back out earlier yesterday morning. So.
Okay, well, speedy recovery to our friend Adam in Victoria. He's feeling better soon. James, any other? I mean, obviously, Compass Box has released some incredible older whiskeys over the years. Some that have become incredibly sought after. I'm thinking things like the General or Last Vatted Malt. I mean, obviously, those whiskeys were also made realistically in a different era when the availability of things was a little different than it is today. For a company like yourselves, how hard is it to find parcels of things like 25-year-old Highland Park and 23-year-old Macallan these days?
It's a great question, a really, really good question. And yeah, you're right. The General 2013, Last Vatted Malt and Grain 2011, whiskey appreciation was still starting to build. A lot of companies, I think, were quite happy to let quite old whiskies get onto the brokerage market. there's a lot of supply that has dried up, unfortunately, for the very old stuff. It is still out there, but I think, and it's not something we want to get too deep into, but I think the growing investment market is making it very hard to look at old whiskies and go, yes, that's good value for money. I will include that in my blend. So they are out there. The issue for us is, the price, because again, we kind of want people to be able to drink our whiskies. We don't particularly get pleasure from seeing sealed bottles on people's shelves, but this is what it's all about. You know, what you've done, opening up bottles. Thank you, James, for helping with that, because that's my bottle personally, and I opened that because the risk is they don't get opened. But the stories that you just shared about, going and finding those old books and what that means, and the history of it, and that only finds its true meaning with whiskey when you're able to drink it. So the parcels are out there. You just have to be quite quick on the trigger. But,
well, I suppose maybe there's a bit of luck too, because I would imagine with some of these things, you're not often getting to try them. You have to take a bit of a gamble and hope that it's going to pan out.
That's it. We always taste. We will always taste before purchasing. We were offered these parcels with samples, so we were able to taste them and understand what we were working with. But that's it. It's the luck. It's the luck of the draw. And I think this is, again, tying into the secondhand bookshop theme. It's, you never quite know what you're going to get when you walk in. It's entirely down to chance and the whims of the person who's put the shelves together. And that's a nice part of the concept too that we like to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. I just for fun went back to try the artist blend, because I like to go back and forth a little bit. I like to see how things change. And man, that is really, especially even following the Vellichor, it's really surprising to me how enjoyable that is and how kind of expressive it is for like what, an 11, 12-year-old at most whiskey. And I think, there's a really good point to be made in that too. Like whiskeys like the Vellichor, and we didn't talk about this tonight, and the experimental grain, there's not a lot out there. And it's the market is different from when I started working with Compass Box 16 years ago, and we were the only people paying attention to them in Alberta at that time. There's other people that want it now because they know there's a market for it. And so the Vellichor, not to get everybody's heart broken here, but we have less than a handful of bottles available for sale. And we're going to send a ballot link out probably tomorrow, but realistically, maybe Sunday. I'm moving tomorrow, so I think tomorrow is a write-off. But the reason we're doing that is because we know there's way more demand than there are bottles, and we want to try to be fair. And the experimental grain, same thing. It's limited. That'll be included in a ballot link that goes out only to people who took part in this tasting or the in-store tasting that we did a couple weeks back, because we also want to reward people who took part in these events and not just the people who are desperate to acquire them, either for their collection or, as much as we might not like to acknowledge it, people who are flipping bottles, which incidentally we're paying a lot more attention to, because when we have 100 people that want 12 bottles and we find out that one of them has sold it on Facebook 5 minutes later, you can be assured we won't be giving them anything limited in the future. Which is not to say that I'm asking you to rat people out. I don't want people to do that. But if it comes to our attention, that's something that's going to happen, because demand and supply are kind of broken for cool things these days. And, we want to see people open them and enjoy them and share them with other people. Whether that's today or 5 years from now, I'm not judging people for holding on to stuff, but I don't like the flipping and it's driving me nuts. So anyway, a little segue there.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys deal with this too, James. Like this, does this come up, people complaining that they can't put their hands on things, and you guys must feel a lot of it.
It does happen, Andrew. You're quite right, and we understand the frustration, and we understand that we are a small company. It's something that maybe doesn't always get enough attention. Is we're 16 people, you know, to service the whole world. And, you know, our route to market is different in every country. And so some things do take a bit longer. Maybe not everything is big enough to get to every market. And, you know, being blenders, we can bring in more casks. I think I feel sorry for the likes of Adelphi, you know, who have one cask of Springbank every 5 years, and not everyone can get hold of it. But we are still the same, you know, experimental grain, less than 6,000 bottles. So yeah, that's only going to get spread so thin. And so we do get people expressing their frustration, and it's that tension between, you know, there's that demand there, but equally there's only so much whiskey, and the recipe makes what it makes.
Well, and you know, I think again, this is another one of the things that I've always loved about Compass Box is kind of the chutzpah of taking things like 14-year-old Ardbeg and buying a parcel of it and saying, I think we can make that taste better. And meanwhile, you've got thousands of people screaming because you've taken Ardbeg that could have been sold as single casks and you've made a blend with it. But, you know, going back to that concept I talked about earlier about what I think really set Compass Box apart 20 years ago when you guys got started was this idea that you could make interesting things that were better than they were on their own. And I was fortunate. I remember, I think it was Jill and I were at the office one day, and I got to try the Ardbeg that went into No Name Number One and try No Name Number One before it was released. And the blend was unquestionably better than the Ardbeg just purely on its own. And I think that's one of the things that I've really loved about it is, you know, you're doing what you're going to do regardless of kind of what the industry or what, you know, customers as a whole might think. And it's something that I really admire about that. And I think this is probably also a good segue into the next whiskey because it has some of that Ardbeg in it.
A brilliant segue, Andrew. You're a true
unintentional.
Completely. Yeah. So this is our next Kensington Wine Market exclusive, and one that is also available. So yeah, this is the 30th, and it's been a lot of fun working on this one with you guys. So yeah, 30 years. I think that does need a little bit of a pause just to acknowledge we've been as a company in existence for nearly 22. So 30 years servicing the thirsty, discerning drinkers of Calgary and beyond is yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I mean, I've said this several times before, and I sincerely mean it. It is, you know, not lost on me that 30 years and the success and where we are today would not be without partners like yourself or James or the customers who are taking part in today's tasting. We know that, and I don't take that for granted ever. And you know, I remember, you know, and this is, you and John and I talked about this when we recorded a little video a couple of weeks back. I wanted to do my own blend almost within 10 minutes of meeting John for the first time and kind of absorbing his passion for whiskey and his passion for blending. And over the course of probably 7 or 8 years, I wore him down to the point where finally he actually himself said, Andrew, you have your business, you have a 25th anniversary coming up, don't you? I said, yes. And he said, I think it's finally time for us to create a blend for you. And, you know, at the time, I know there was only a handful of other businesses that you guys had done this for. And it's not lost on me that I am, in comparison with a lot of those, much smaller. Kensington Wine Market is much smaller than that, and been very grateful for it. And it was a bit of I honestly expected the answer to be no when I asked, you know, is it possible that we could do a 30th anniversary blend? Not because I would think for a moment that, you know, John or Compass Box takes our business for granted, but just that you guys are a busy company and there's only so much time in the day. There's only so many resources available. Doing, you know, a one-off like this where, you know, there's artwork involved, which I love on this one. There's, you know, expectations and realities and an importer and all these different pieces, you know, and I would have been okay with that. And I'm just absolutely thrilled that you guys were willing to do this again. Because, you know, we've bottled single casks, we do a lot of those, but all we're really doing there is selecting something. In this case, it's something where we've given you an idea of what we like, what we might want. You create something, we get to provide feedback. And then even then when we get close, there's like a tweaking of it. I mean, I remember one of my guys, Sean, one of his comments on the second from last sample we had was, it would be great if this could be just a little bit brighter. And you guys added another element to it based on that description. And I'm thrilled with how it came out.
Fantastic. Yeah, it was, this is where I come at the single cask phenomenon as well. And obviously there are great single casks. I've bought them in the past and I'll continue to buy them. But when you're able to participate, when you're able to get involved, it's a very different proposition. And so, yeah, it was, I remember it being, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but I remember it being quite an open conversation at first. I think the brief for the second one was pretty loose, but, you know, we wanted to give you something bold. We wanted to give you something celebratory, because 30 years doesn't come around too often. So for us, it was like, okay, we've got some really great Mortlach in recharred barrels. We've got this old Kalila. We've got some of that Ardbeg. We know the Kalila and the Ardbeg work together in a really good peat unit. And so, yeah, we sent the first sample across, courtesy of James and Stephanie and all the team. So it reached you, and yeah, you came back with a bit more brightness, a bit more of that bourbon influence. So it's like, okay, take one of the Mortlachs out, and let's bring in a slightly older Tir Ninnick in first fill bourbon, and bright it certainly was. So that just helps to round out this overall picture, because yeah, there is peat here. It's gingery, it's spicy, but it really is all about this extra fruit note, which I think, yeah, the Mortlach and the Tir Ninnick are bringing. But super tasty whiskey. I'm really pleased that this is being already enjoyed by the Canadian faithful.
Yeah, no, and this is one people were really excited about. We've had a lot of people even commenting that, you know, they'd had a chance to try the 25th, but they missed out on getting to buy one. And so they were really eager not to miss out on this one. And, you know, I think, again, like we were so excited to be able to work on another blend like this, that we were very flexible. I mean, I was just thrilled with the opportunity to do it again with no preconceived notions of it. And I think, you know, you guys created something once again that exceeded our initial expectations. You know, to have a blend that's got a considerable portion of Ardbeg in it, but not just Ardbeg, the Ardbeg that was part of No Name, which is a whiskey that I really loved, you know, kind of ties things into like the stories that we like to tell about Compass Box. And then that there's a connection, a personal connection to us as well. You know, people are probably commenting on it, but James, I'm hoping we can just quickly identify one of my favorite little footnotes about this whiskey, which is that with all Compass Box whiskeys, you know, you tell people to the percentage, sometimes to the decimal point, how much of each whiskey is in the blend. But this time we can't be 100% sure of that.
Absolutely. So we can be 100% sure on the components. So the Tir Ninnick, the Mortlach, the Kalila, the Ardbeg. But unfortunately, yeah, the exact proportions of those are a little bit of a mystery. But you have my best guesswork there. And this is all because every so often a cask will surprise you. You know, it's a bad thing when your roof leaks. It's even worse when a cask does. So we had figures that we were working on with our bottlers, and one, maybe more than one cask clearly had less in it than had originally been forecasted. So we asked for the blend to be created. We get a sample, we smell it and we go, well, this isn't quite right. Then we look at how much is in the tank, and it's not much more than half of what we were expecting. So back to the drawing board. So over the next couple of weeks, myself and John and Jill and Elif we were just tweaking. We were bringing in, we were fortunate to have more of all of the components, the exact same parcels, the exact same ages, same cask types. So it was just a case of adding a little bit more teoninic, you know, maybe a touch more of that Kalila, and getting to something which matches what we originally wanted to make for you, Andrew. So yeah, we have, we know that certain components were added because we only wanted part of the cask. So we know that that's definitely the quantity that's in there. But as I say, the relative proportions are slightly hazy. But yeah, this is the wonderful thing about transparency. We let you know when it went completely smoothly, and we let you know when things are a bit wobbly.
Yeah. Well, and I love, you know, because again, for ourselves, you know, approximate values, that just creates more narrative for us, and it's a fun talking point that this is a compass box whiskey with a margin of error, and it's kind of fun. And at the end of the day, all of this is just, you know, frankly, inconsequential, because the liquid is excellent, and that ultimately is the best point, and the most important point. So absolutely love this. Really, really digging it. And Jeff asking, can you taste a plus minus 2% difference anyways? I think some people probably could. I mean, I think in some circumstances I might be able to. I mean, I always love, and I'll go back to some of the no name series where you have these very heavily weighted blended malts with major components, and then there's always, you know, 10% Clynelish, 10% Talisker, and they always make a noticeable difference, even within, you know, a blend that's got a big heavy weighting in one direction. But still, regardless of that, I think the fact that it's lovely is excellent. So really love it. So James, you know, you're the whiskey maker for this. Your signature's on the bottle there. So I just want to say thank you. This was phenomenal. I'm thrilled with how it came out. We've had lots of great reviews from our customers on it. And, you know, one of the things we talked about earlier in the store today was when we did our 25th anniversary blend, we noticed bottles were popping up on auction sites before we'd even sold out of it. And it was kind of funny, but also sort of frustrating, because they were selling for $600 and we were retailing them at the time for about 160. We've limited sales for at least a couple of months because we want this to get out to as many people as possible. And for a lot of them, we know that'll be either taking part in an event like this or coming into the store and having a chance to try it, because we don't want somebody buying a case of them and then shipping them to Scotch whiskey auctions the next day. We want as many people as possible to actually be able to try this and get a chance to enjoy it. And how cool is it that we've got a whiskey that's got the Calgary Tower and Bankers Hall and the bow on it with some mountains in the background. Really thrilled with how that turned out.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, we are too. It's a great combination of whiskies, and it's its own thing, which is really great.
Absolutely. So I think, I don't know, before we segue to the 25th, and I know James was kind of teeing that up by referencing Fort Whoop Up. James also had a question, because he said he's been approached by a number of people that want bespoke blends since this one was announced and released. How often is it that you guys are approached by people to do bespoke projects like this?
Yeah, you would need to talk to John about that, and you know, the likes of Scott and Karen and all of our sales team. They're the ones that tend to get the most requests. I don't, fortunately. I can just hide away with my samples. But yeah, the demand is definitely there. We tend to do between about 3 and 4 a year, or at least we have historically, but it really does vary. So it's not a formal program. It's not one with a dedicated resource in terms of, you know, a team. So it can be quite time consuming to get that recipe right. And so there is a very select group of people that we want to work with.
Yeah. Well, and I think you can acknowledge, for a company like yours, it's effectively the equivalent of a distillery doing a single cask for one customer. It's something that interrupts everything else you're doing, because you have to dedicate the time to create it, the labeling, bottling. Like people don't even think about the logistical hassle of things like bottling, but to do a one-off run of 500 to 600 bottles takes time away from other things you guys need to do or have bottled. So it's something we're very grateful for. So again, on behalf of everyone on my team and everyone here in Calgary, thank you for that opportunity again, because we're honored to be able to do it. 25th anniversary blend. I'm thrilled that we get to try this again. This one was a bit of a sleeper when it first came in. I think there was an element of people out there that were really like looking forward to it, but it's one of those ones where we had to really convince people this is something cool and interesting. Now, unlike the 30th anniversary blend, which is actually a blended malt, this is an actual blended whiskey. So there's grain in it as well as malt. And again, going back to the openness we had for style, I remember when John and I were talking about this initially, one of the early recipes had, and I love this, I love that it was even an option, but Compass Box's The Circle, or not The Circle, The Circus, sorry, Compass Box The Circus, they had about 30 liters of what's called line wash left over. And line wash is essentially the whiskey that goes through the bottling line before the whiskey you're going to bottle to make sure that the bottling line doesn't have any traces of the whiskey that was in it before. And for obvious reasons, distillers, blenders don't bottle this because it's going to not taste like what they want it to. But I remember John saying to me, Andrew, we have 30 liters of this Compass Box, the Circus line wash. And he said, normally I would not even bring it up in a conversation to see if someone wanted it incorporated in their blend, but I know you're a little different. So I thought we'd do it. And the only unfortunate thing about that is it didn't work. And we had to take it out. It didn't work in the final recipe. And as we indicated before, sadly, James, you do not have a bottle of this or a sample of this, although I'm going to remedy that in the fall with you. But this is I'll pull up the 25th anniversary blend schematics here if you give me a quick second.
I'll just, keep enjoying the 30th.
You keep enjoying the 30th. Well, yeah, we'll make sure that you get a taste of this when I'm over in the fall. So I'm just going to pull this up and we'll share my screen. I had to go back and actually look at this again because 5 years is a long time, especially, with a pandemic in the middle. And as James Bourne in Victoria tonight commented, the original makeup for this, John loves, as you know, loves stories. He loves interesting facts. And south of Calgary, there was a whiskey trading fort, but also an RCMP, or at that time, Northwest Mounted Police Force, to prevent whiskey traders from the States trading whiskeys with our First Nations people in Canada. It was called Fort Whoop-Up. And John desperately wanted to call this whiskey Fort Whoop-Up, but Fort Whoop-Up is 2.5 hours away from us. It would be like, I suppose, you guys doing a bottling for the Whiskey Exchange and naming it after something in York. It just didn't make sense, but he did work it into his description of it. But the whiskey in the end was lovely. It was a great blend. We've had a lot of people reach out to us since because they weren't able to acquire a bottle at the time. And sadly, I do not have extra whiskey available. But the original genesis behind this was I loved the Flaming Heart releases, but I also loved Spice Tree. And I think that was kind of the creative direction that I'd initially given John and Jill. Was I wanted something that kind of merged Spice Tree and the Flaming Heart.
Yeah, those are two very good ancestors to draw genetics from, a segue I sense building, but the way you can manipulate French oak for creating texture and flavor, and the way it sort of gives a little bit of extra body and power to peat is a really, really exciting thing, and something that we'll return to for the final whiskey tonight. But Yeah, John does love his trivia when it comes to all of these whiskies. So yeah, I'm not sure there was another name ever considered for this one, but given the amount of arithmetic I had to do, maybe Fort add up would have been appropriate.
Yeah. Do you have the actual original recipe to hand?
So the original recipe was going to be basically 25% more, like 25% tannic. That's basically what we worked around, and then there would have been some
Sorry,
minor
sorry,
adjustments.
I meant for the 25th. I know Scott had pulled that up because I'm looking at my website and unfortunately I don't have it on there.
Okay. Well, yeah, I don't have any records on my PC, but once I'm back in the office, I should be able to connect to our database and should be able to pull that up.
No, it's okay. I mean, I do know that there was a small amount of old pre-blended sherried whiskey in there, which I think does add an element to it. Damn, I should have got Scott to give me that slide when he was in town a couple of weeks ago. Because the descriptor that I've got here is that it 45% and that the components were matured in first fill American oak, sherry butts, and French oak. And I think that is a notable difference from what we've got with the 30th, which is all American oak, and none of those French oak or European oak seasoned with sherry elements to it. But yeah.
Yeah, the 30th is definitely a little bit more down the line, and it's always been for Compass Box, American oak, especially barrels. It's our first love.
Now, I don't know if this is a question that you can answer, but Sky Andrews was wondering, obviously the label for the 30th anniversary, there's a story a bit behind it and there was direction. Do you remember what the original, like what the lines and the squiggly stuff on the 25th anniversary label?
I'll be honest, I don't, and I for someone who likes creative writing, I at the same time hate making stuff up in contexts like these. I can definitely find out for you. But yeah, we wanted to incorporate the red and the yellow for sure. But it looks quite celebratory and jaunty, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, the yellow and black and well, the background white makes sense because those are all our corporate colors. But I think it had something to do with, it was a concept that they were going to roll out to do small batch blends for different customers. And I think they just decided not to make it as big as they were originally planning to, but I think they were all going to be variations on something like this. And then I think gears were shifted and different directions changed. But again, I barely remember what happened a month ago. 5 years ago now is a complete mystery to me.
Well, that does ring a bell, actually, Andrew, because obviously you've got 4 straight lines there, and there are 4 components in the whiskey. So I think yeah, there was some thinking that maybe we could have all sorts of abstract colors and shapes, but which actually give some clue or a base around the structure of the recipe. So I think that may be a part of it.
And maybe if you measure them in a very specific format, that tells you how old the components are. And anyway, I'm just and like angled one direction is peated, angled a different direction not. Anyway, we don't know. Drinking by color, as Jeff says.
Very true. Very true.
Let's talk about Flaming Heart. Now, obviously, I don't want to break too many hearts here before we try this. This whiskey is not available. We have James born in Vancouver to thank for this. These are 2 bottles that were contributed to this lineup of the 15th anniversary Flaming Heart, which I believe was released in 2015. So this is a treat just to be able to taste this whiskey, but please don't ask. There was none of this to be had.
Yeah. I wish I could get my hands on more of this. So yeah, fantastic that two bottles surfaced from a cupboard somewhere. But yeah, there is a little link, actually. I think John did a tasting for you guys for your 25th, and this was also poured at that. So we've got a chance to see what 5 years of bottle aging does to Flaming Heart 2015. Yeah.
And you know what's funny about that trip? I didn't want to bring it up earlier, but we did a tasting for a club in town, and I know Kelly from the Scotchman Whisky Society Canada was more than likely there too, where we did a tasting with John to launch the 25th, but that range included the last vatted malt, Circus, it included the General. And I remember John being blown away because he himself had not done a tasting with all those whiskeys, but he was in a room with a bunch of people who, if they're stashing bottles like that away, it's because they know at some point they're going to want to put them into a fun range like that. And it was customers and club members contributing bottles back to make what would have been a cool tasting even cooler. And, I think that's one of the things that I've always loved about it too, is these whiskeys are there to be drank, and that might not be tomorrow, but they are there to be drank and to be shared. So.
Yeah, definitely. Just remember to keep those corks a little bit wet, folks. Once all natural corks we use at Compass Box, and over time they can dry out a bit. So just keep them every 6 months. That's all you need to do. But yeah, this is one of my absolute favorite whiskeys, and it's a pleasure to be concluding tonight's tasting with it, because I actually, before I worked for Compass Box, was a fan of what John and the team were doing, but Flaming Heart was what I started collecting. So picked up a bottle of the 2015 release on release, and it's taken me to different auctions to get the rest. But yeah, this is an absolutely outstanding. It's just the epitome of what we want to achieve with this whole project. So Flaming Heart started in 2006, and there have been 6 renditions in total released, and it's all based around oak, smoke, and fire. So the name comes from a rock song by M. Ward, and it's all about getting that peat and that French oak influence that I mentioned at the very start with our custom French oak casks, all about getting these 2 wonderful performers to duet together. And yeah, this is outstanding. But then if you combine 20-year-old Kleinlich with 14 and 30-year-old Kalila, you're going to be onto a winner, right?
Mm-hmm. I don't think there's any truth to this, but for the longest time, I used to joke that Flaming Heart was John's attempt at recreating a young Port Ellen, because there was that Kalila element there, but then adding some spice into it and a bit more fruit. It just reminded me of back in the day when it was common to have 21, 22-year-old Port Ellens available, which is obviously a much bygone era now.
Yeah, I'll have to quiz him on that next time I see him. Yeah, Kleinlich and Kalila are his first loves. The wonderful thing about blending, though, is that you can take inspiration from whiskies of the past, bring them into new arrangements. Obviously, Port Ellen will always be Port Ellen, Brora will always be Brora. But yeah, if you find the right parcel of X and another great parcel of Y, bring those together, and you're creating something new while still calling back to the past. And I think that's a really, really powerful thing to do. And as we've talked about all throughout tonight, the stories are part of the pleasure.
Well, it is kind of an, just going by palate, this is an old school style of peated whiskey where you have, a lot of Kalilas, even the older ones that come out today, are fairly modern, because there's this, there's the peat, you have the phenols, you've got often some bacon, seafoody tones there. You get a little bit of citrus, but you don't get a lot of other developed fruits, I find, with Kalila. But I think adding that Kleinlich element in there, you've added some nice fruit, you've added some nice honey, some sweetness to it. And yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's an outstanding parcel of Kalila that we used for this in 1984. So obviously not a huge amount of whiskey was being made in 1984, but Diageo wanted to keep the lights on at Kalila. And you're right, as you get towards 30 years of age, with Kalila, you start to develop that fruitiness, so apricot-y kind of qualities, but also just a wonderful sort of soft industrial quality. And actually, it's the same parcel of Kalila that went into Tobias and the Angel that we released in 2019. So some parcels are here and gone. Some actually we have a bit of a relationship with, and they help us tell the story of Compass Box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. James Bourne should probably be an interviewer, because he's got a great question for you, which we'll get to in a second. I love this. We've always got 2 or 3 people, and I know we've got Jeff and Kevin and now Sky, all of whom are doing research for us on the fly to help us look good and check facts. Sky pulled from Compass, or on the Compass Box 25th anniversary Kensington bottling from Whiskey Base, that it was a mix of first fill bourbon barrels, refill hogsheads, French oak barrels from Clynelish, Kalila, Dalyuen, Teaneck, blended with 30-year-old Cambus and Cameron Bridge, and 2% old sherry cask malt whiskey from an unknown distillery. So there you go. And James is asking James, if John's 2 muses are Kalila and Clynelish, what are yours?
So that is a very, very good question. Kalila was kind of my gateway Islay whiskey. So I got into whiskey through my mum, and her favorite whiskey at the time was Lafroig 10. I was terrified on trying that whiskey for the first time. I was like, what the hell is this? I've never this peated stuff. No, it's not for me. Well, fortunately, Kalila just reeled me in, and now I can just about stomach Lafroig, fortunately. But yeah, Kalila is definitely on my peated spectrum. There's a whiskey that we are now using a lot in the new Artist blend, and it's from Speyside, and it's called Balmenach. And we've actually used it in as a bit of a replacement for Clynelish sometimes, certainly in our Highland malt blend, which goes into the French oak. And it's different to Clynelish, of course it is, but it has a similar weight on the palate. And in the right casks, it can become exceptionally fruity and sweet. And it's also got a great story. I feel like I'm just pulling books from the shelf tonight. But, I'd recommend anybody picks up this. It's by Robert Bruce Lockhart, a writer from sort of the middle of the 20th century. And his grandfather, from the McGregor clan, and his grandfather ran Balmenach. So there's some interesting stories in here about Balmenach. So that would be it, really. It's a bit of an unshowy distillery. In fact, if you're in the UK, it's better known for producing Carun gin, but the whiskey it makes is really, really characterful. Worm tubs. I'm sure there's some unusual yeast, wooden washbacks, all good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about just briefly before I've got a poll that I'm going to put out and give people a chance to vote for their favorite whiskeys. But before I do that, I think what you're just talking about, it kind of makes me want to quickly talk about something you brought up briefly earlier, which is the Orchard House whiskey. And the reason I want to talk about that is because for most of Compass Box's history, you have been acquiring components and then creating things from them. But I think, necessity being the mother of invention, the business has had to change and adapt to continue to operate in an increasingly complex market. You're now actually taking and, maturing whiskey from birth effectively to bottle down the line. Can you talk maybe a little bit about that and give people a little bit of insight into what opportunities that's creating? Because I think a lot of people, myself included, have been blown away by new whiskeys like Orchard House.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great opportunity to talk about something that we're now sort of in more of a position to share. And it's, since 2013, you kind of go to the source. I think even at that point, we were realizing that for the ambitions we wanted for our core products, especially our Ben Glasgow blend, Peat Monster, realistically, the market was changing and mature stocks were becoming a lot harder to come by. So therefore, we'll find the casks, we bring the spirit to the casks, and then we basically watch over them ourselves. So since 2013, we've been doing that. And Orchard House, which we released in the summer last year, end of summer, that basically takes full advantage of those stocks. So 98% of Orchard House is whiskey we have laid down ourselves. Mostly from Linkwood, from Clynelish, a bit of Ben Renner's, a tiny touch of a meaty Speyside malt, and a little bit of Kalila as well. So all of that is a great testament to, just taking a bit more control over your own destiny.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it creates other opportunities too, where you can have a lot more control over the components. And for certain things, having a younger whiskey as a component that's got a much more prominent oak presence in it can allow you to make up for or add things to other whiskeys that maybe have not matured as quickly, but there's something interesting there and something that you can work with. Well, no, I think that's exciting and it's cool. And I hope that there's more of those things happening that we'll find out about as time rolls on. I'm going to queue up the poll now. If anyone's got any other questions that they want to ask, please feel free to fire that into the chat. We can have James answer it before we let him get off to bed, because it is obviously approaching 1:30 in the morning in the UK. So the poll's up. I'm going to leave that up for a couple minutes now. James, any other exciting new whiskeys you want to tease? I mean, Flaming Heart, I don't know if we talked about the fact that there's a new release of that's already out in the UK, but it's coming to our side of the pond eventually here.
Yes, so we do have the 7th Flaming Heart coming out this year. So it's not bottled yet, so it's not available anywhere currently. So yeah, don't feel too hard done by, guys. It's everyone's waiting for it. But yeah, that's going to be launching hopefully in time for some of the festivals. So Whiskey Show in London, Whiskey Life Paris. We've got a bit of a festival presence planned for that. I'll say no more at this stage. But yeah, that's basically going to take Lefroy.
I'll be there.
And Andrew will be there. He'll be live vlogging. And so, yeah, when it comes to this whiskey, we're building it around Lefroy and Kalila, which are mainstays of Flaming Heart, but we're bringing in a little bit of Talisker as well, which is another parcel that I adore. So if I was, honestly, James, to answer your question about, very important distilleries to me, I could go on all night, but yeah, Talisker would actually make it into the top 5 too. So very excited for that. There's going to be some Glenelg there. We're hoping this is going to be, I think, certainly the fruitiest Flaming Heart in recent years, still with a big punch of French oak spice, still with a lot of smoke. But yeah, we're excited for that to come out.
Yeah, I'm even more excited now.
Yeah, there is, if you go on our website, there is an coming up or coming soon section. So you can see there's a couple there, Flaming Heart included, and Ultramarine. Ultramarine will launch around about the same time. And that is the first of a new series, which we're calling the Extinct Blends Quartet. So no prizes for guessing how many will be in that series.
I'm not sure that you can answer Kevin's question here, asking which other Compass Box whiskeys would you consider closest to the 25th and 30th anniversary? I believe he means Kensington bottlings. Since you have yet to try the 25th, which I've said,
that would be a tough one for me.
I'll probably have to take a flyer on that. I'd say not the 15th anniversary Flaming Heart, but one of the other ones, one of the prior bottlings would probably have been the closest to that.
Yeah, maybe the 2012, which had a bit of sherry in there.
Yeah, but what about the 30th anniversary? Can you think of any bottlings you guys have done that might have been approximating that?
It's a really good question. In terms of our core range, no. In terms of recent limited editions, I think I'm also going to have to say no. The one that might get closest, actually, although it's softer in the smoke, was the 3rd in the Myths and Legends series. So we launched that at the end of 2019. That was a blended malt, Glenelg, Highland Park, a bit of Kalila. But yeah, this is much more assertive in terms of its smokiness. So yeah, tough one. It really is its own beast, especially with the 20-year-old Tianinic and Mortlach. There's nothing we've released recently that really comes close to this combination.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing for me that's even remote would be like the No Name 2, but even then, this is nowhere near as intense as that. That had a much greater intensity to it. So, yeah, a tough one, but an interesting question nonetheless. Okay, I'm going to stop the poll here. So if you've not voted, it's too late. And I'm going to share that for everyone here. So I'm not entirely surprised by this, but the strong favorite #1 whiskey tonight was the Vellichor, first favorite, followed by the Flaming Heart. And then it looks like a tie between the artist blend, and the 25th anniversary. And then interestingly, and I'm feeling pretty good about this. Strong favorite for second favorite whiskey tonight was the 30th anniversary blend. So I'm loving that dominated round two. And I think it's also great to see that everything got a little bit of love here. All the whiskeys had at least a couple of people who really enjoyed them tonight. So that's awesome. James, this was fantastic. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this. I think when we've done tastings like this, the most interesting ones we've always done are with the people that are the most hands-on in the creation of what we're talking about, because anybody can sell the romance of a project. Anyone can communicate what the core values of a business are, but to be able to talk to somebody that actually has a hand in making what you're talking about, I think is incredibly interesting. So I just want to say a huge thank you to you for doing that. This was a lot of fun. Maybe someday, John will let you travel across the ocean and we can do one of these in person and pull some cool old compass box out of people's collections to round out the range. But until then, a huge thank you to you for taking part in tonight's tasting and staying up late with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yeah, I really hope I can get out to Calgary very soon. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Well, I'll see what I can do to make that happen. In the meantime, everybody, stay tuned for an email sometime in the next 48 hours with details on how to put your name in the ballot for the Vellichor and the experimental grain. If you joined late, the reason for that is I'm dealing with home stuff and business reconstruction stuff, and it'll come out when it comes out. I've got the email half drafted. I just have to finish it. But it's also a long weekend, so chill out for the weekend. Don't worry about whiskey too much. You'll have all of next week to put your name in there. So thank you for taking part out of your long weekend to enjoy a whiskey tasting with us. I hope you all have a great night, great summer. James, thanks for everything. And everyone, I hope you have a great night. We'll talk soon.